Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to do the next installment in my ongoing series of videos all about the 90s PBS Kids TV show, Wishbone. This was a television program that split its 30-minute episodes into two different storylines. One followed a family living in Texas with their pet Jack Russell Terrier, Wishbone, and the other adapted and condensed famous works of literature. The two storylines were always connected by a common theme that was pulled out of the work of literature in question. In this series of videos I do here on my channel, I look at one episode of Wishbone per video. I compare that episode against the work of literature they chose to focus on. I discuss their choices of what to include from the book versus what they would want to leave out and why they might want to leave it out. I talk about what moral messages they choose to highlight from the book, since their audience is children after all. And ultimately, I give you my opinion about whether or not it made for an entertaining episode of television. In today's video, we'll be looking at the episode that takes on Mary Shelley's dark classic Frankenstein, in the mid-season 1 episode entitled Frankenbone. It lives. What's the story, Wishbone?
What's the story, Wishbone? What's this you're dreaming of?
At the start of the episode, Wishbone's owner Joe is hard at work on a project for the science fair. He's constructing some sort of a skeleton, but it's not going the greatest for him. His good friend David stops by to say hi and lets Joe know that he too is entering a project into the science fair, although he will not say what he's working on because it's top secret. This, of course, leads Wishbone to introduce the book section in which the dog himself plays Swiss medical student Victor Frankenstein, who is curious about whether or not death can be overcome by using science. Back in the real-life storyline, Joe's making good progress on his project with the help of a special glue that their neighbor Wanda invented. Things are actually starting to stick together now, as they should, and because Joe is pleased with where he's at, he decides to go check in on David to see how he's doing with his project. But when he arrives at David's house, David is not all that eager to show him what he's been up to. Joe's a good friend, he respects David's wishes and goes on his merry way. But Wishbone is a dog and isn't bogged down by social niceties. He sticks around and sees that David has built a robot that's apparently supposed to walk and talk when you press a button. Victor Frankenstein has been putting his own work in, trying to see if death can, in fact, be thwarted by science. He pours all of his energy into bringing a lifeless being, a combination of various body parts, to life. But when that experiment actually works, he is horrified and rejects his creation on the spot. He flees, and by the time he gets back, the creature is gone. Meanwhile, in David's garage, a lightning bolt provides just enough power to boot up the robot, which I should note looks like an air conditioning unit on top of a Roomba. But anyway, the thing escapes. Wishbone chases after it and tries to talk it into going back toward the school, back toward David's house. But if you can believe it, the thing just can't be reasoned with. David goes into the school where the fair setup is happening and confuses just about everyone when he tells them that he thinks his project got up and walked away. Frankenstein gets that struggle and eventually decides that he has to confront his creation, which has, according to Wishbone's narration, been wreaking havoc across Eastern Europe. When the two finally come face to face, the creature admits that he's only causing destruction because the world, starting with his own creator, has rejected him. He asks for Frankenstein to make him a friend, but the scientist immediately refuses him. The creature promises more destruction in retaliation for being condemned to loneliness. Frankenstein pursues his creature the whole way to the Arctic, intent on stopping him. He's in dire straits, near death, when he's rescued by the leader of a scientific expedition to whom he tells his entire life story, including the story of this monster that he's responsible for. The monster then bursts in, looking for his creator, unexpectedly expressing gratitude toward Frankenstein for giving him life. The kids do eventually catch up with David's robot. They take it back into their possession and get it all ready to be presented at the science fair. However, when they're at the science fair, the thing once again gets accidentally tripped by lightning. It goes haywire and starts ripping the whole place apart, destroying pretty much everybody else's science projects. David and company end up having to clean the whole place up afterwards. Wishbone helps, but with the bones, of course. Before I talk about anything else, I want to first talk about my feelings regarding the connected real-life storyline. I think the science fair angle was a good way to go. And the fact that there's a robot that's turned on too easily and runs amok, I think that's even better. I think the way they chose to do it made the most sense. And the moral message they pulled out of Frankenstein had a lot to do with responsibility. There's a scene where Joe is assembling his science fair project with Wanda using that glue that she created, and they're talking about inventions and how inventions are best when they're put to a purpose. They're done to solve some sort of a problem as opposed to doing them just for the sake of doing them. And it seemed to imply the kind of thing where just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do something. It seemed like they were hinting at that. And that's pretty nicely proven when David's invention, which is definitely cool but largely unnecessary, starts making a mess out of things. At the very end of the episode, David says something like, when you bring something to life, you have to take responsibility for what it does. And that is perfect. I mean, absolutely perfect for Frankenstein. But the thing about Frankenstein is that it's not a story that actually celebrates science in the way that a science fair does. This story actually encapsulates the fear that the Romantic generation was feeling about the burgeoning field of science, the skepticism that they felt toward it. First of all, they weren't calling it science, at least not in the way we do now, but this is a story about the power that comes with these scientific discoveries and the associated responsibilities, and most importantly, the horrors of what could go wrong even without malintent when you're messing with something that you don't fully understand. So having a science fair be at the center of the connected real-life storyline, it makes the most sense. But if you've read the book, it's also deeply ironic. But listen, even back in the 90s, people wanted their kids to get excited about science. They wanted them to consider careers in science, so there was just no chance that that aspect of the book would be represented in this episode. But if you've read the book, you'll know that there's a lot about it that they would need to change in order to make it appropriate for an audience full of children. Not just the whole yay science thing. I mean, the ending. The creature was never grateful for being given life, and rightfully so. It seems pretty set in stone by the end of the book, like we're all in agreement here that Victor Frankenstein bringing this thing to life was the wrong thing to do. It was a bad thing to do. I also couldn't help but feel insulted on behalf of the creature for the way that he's being portrayed. I was thankful that they didn't give him the whole green skin, bolt in the neck treatment, because wow, is that off base. But they show him as being destructive from the jump. The creature actually starts its life as a gentle, naive, kind being. It's not until the world, or more specifically people within the world, have beaten up on him, turned him away based exclusively on the way that he looks, that he becomes world-weary. And most of his resentment is directed at his creator for making him a one-of-a-kind being that's just destined for loneliness. When it comes to the creature's violence, there is one common thread between the book and the Wishbone adaptation of the book, and that's that the creature promises more violence when his plea for companionship is outright rejected by his creator. In the show, he asks for a friend, when in the book he asks for a female. Toning that down makes sense for a kid's show, when in reality the sentiment is the same. He wants a companion. He doesn't want to be the only one of his species. But in the show, there is not even a single mention of everything the creature went through prior to making this plea. There's no mention of the cottagers that he spent a year observing, learning from, and essentially falling in love with. There's no mention of the fact that he saved a child's life only to get shot at as his reward. These are very really important things to understand about the creature. The creature is not inherently bad. He's treated as a monster and so becomes one. It is very important to understand about him, and he is a much more sympathetic character in the book, definitely. I think they should have carved some time out of the show, just a few minutes, and they had ample time to spare. There's a lot of downtime in this episode. I think they could have showed that the creature tries to be good, but he's turned away and treated like a monster based on the way that he looks, and that's not the right way to treat people. This sounds like a moral message that they absolutely could have included. I also noticed that in the show, Frankenstein, who's played by Wishbone, is a whole lot more self-righteous when he is not that way in the book. In the book, he is essentially a walking sack of misery. His conscience is heavy. He knows he's done something awful, and he carries that dark cloud around with him wherever he goes. He's the emo kid of the romantic generation. But in the show, oh no, Frankenstein holds himself far above his monster. So yeah. While I liked what they did with the real-life storyline more or less, the book side of things was always going to be tricky. I mean, basically all of the characters end up either miserable or dead. Most of them end up dead. And the book itself is a cautionary tale about science. A bit of an issue when this is an educational television program that's going to want to promote science. It was an entertaining episode. Watching Wishbone chase a homemade robot around a park, that's reason enough to keep watching. But I'm not sure there was a best way to divorce this story from its time period and make it relevant to a 90s audience. So those were my thoughts on Frankenstein and on this episode of Wishbone. If you have any comments or questions about anything you've seen in this video or about anything in general, please feel free to leave it in the comment section below. But if you would like to connect with me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.
Funding for Wishbone provided by annual financial support from PBS viewers like you.